Good evening, everyone. I am Norm Potter. I'm here for Educational Norm for another episode. Tonight, we're going to be talking about differentiation. Before we get started, I always want to thank Nick for the use of his music. And also, I want to thank Kyle, my loyal listener up there in Michigan. I works at Eastern Michigan University, and he said he listens to this when he's getting the kids ready in the morning. And also, I'm going to give a shout out to my friend Dwight, who owns Powerhouse Gym there in Eastlake. He didn't know that was coming. It's not a paid endorsement by any means, but since I try to keep it casual and you may be wondering where their shirts come from, I want to make sure I give him a little plug for his gym out there in Eastlake, Ohio. Um, like I said, today we're going to be talking about differentiation. And by the title of the evening, you can say, does differentiation work? And the obvious answer is yes. But there is some debate about that right now. And what I found is that in that research that's being done on differentiation, that the reason that it doesn't work, it seems to be, is not that it doesn't work for kids, it doesn't work for teachers. Teachers have a really hard time planning and or carrying out the lessons because of the depth in which you have to go to make it work for so many different kids. As a former teacher of a classroom in science and social studies, in my first 8 years of teaching, I'd never had any assistance whatsoever in a classroom. So I would have special needs kids that can't read or write in the same classroom as somebody that was gifted. And the idea of differentiation, of meeting kids at their level and then moving them forward, is obviously a great idea. And that's what we try to do for every kid. But how do you manage it in a classroom where you have somebody that has hard time spelling their own name consistently and somebody else that, is taking 10th grade math in seventh grade? That's the struggle that teachers have. And then to carry that out logistically in the classroom so you can work with one and let the other ones go, or how do you teach those things? That's where it becomes difficult. And in looking at the research from somebody by the name of Mike Schmoker, that some of you may be familiar with, his one book, Focus and Leading with Focus, they're right here. I keep them close by. Um, he basically put it out there that differentiation doesn't work. And it wasn't that it didn't work because of the concept, it didn't work because it was too hard to carry out. And then other people jumped on that same bandwagon and said the exact same thing, that even when given a lot of training, uh, the pieces that you need in place to make it happen really are difficult. So I set out on my journey to try to prove that differentiation can be done in the classroom and it can be done easily. And it's one of those things where I really set my mind to try to figure out a way of doing that, because in the classroom, I see the value of meeting kids where they're at. So tonight, I'm going to share with you some of the ideas that I've had over time and share with you the journey of differentiation in my classroom. And I'll tell you, it wasn't an overnight thing. I taught for almost 10 years before I really came up with a system I felt comfortable with. And even with that level of comfort, there was some changes that I had to make, because it's a very different style. And the planning in the front end is huge. And I was worried about how I'm going to carry that out consistently through the rest of my career. And it was hard. And that's why I came up with a system later in my career to make it work. So that very first unit that I ever did, like I said, came in 10 years later, and it was a group of eighth graders that I had as sixth graders. So I knew exactly what I was getting in my students at that time. And in my one class, I did have a very high population of special need kids that had very specific IEPs and 504s that I had to follow. And I also had probably three labeled gifted and a lot of others that were probably close but not labeled. And what I decided is that I have to teach all these kids, and I didn't want to hold any one back. So I really worked on this unit on heredity, which is towards the end of the year of science. And I got to know the kids, and I threw it out there. And what I ended up finding was that they taught me more than I taught them about how to really reach kids. My one gifted student, I gave her the idea of what she should be doing as a finishing assessment, and she ended up taking it way beyond what I ever thought, because I gave her that leeway to do it. So her project was to come up with some generational research to find out what genes she should be carrying over multi generations. And she took it a step further by asking if she could do a Photoshop version of herself if she received all the recessive genes throughout her family over multiple generations. So that's what we tried to do, or that's what she did. And she came in later and asked if she could show it to the class. So we put it up on the screen and she talked about it. And lo and behold, some of the other kids, even the ones that I would say struggled with just the basics of that information, asked if they could do it. And me being, a naive teacher, I just said, "Oh, you're not going to get graded on it." And it didn't deter them. They all went home and they started working on it, and they would come in and ask for help during lunch or after school or before school. And within a week, I probably had 5 more of those projects from all levels of kids where they came in with their recessive gene photoshopped all together. And it was truly amazing that even though I wasn't going to grade it, they still wanted to learn about it and learn how to do it. And I let the one student, who's now a doctor, basically lead that discussion and how she went about it. So it really was a learning experience for me. And it showed that, sometimes we pigeonhole kids that if they don't get the basics done, they can't do that higher level thinking. And I find that's not always the case. And I think another example of that would be, getting your driver's license. They may not be able to take the written test very well, but I know plenty of kids that grew up on farms that could back a trailer in and drive very safely down the road if given the opportunity, but they may not know the vocabulary behind it. As long as they know the street signs, they can get you there. So it's those types of opportunities that we have to provide kids to make sure that we're reaching to their max potential. So, as I said, that was my first adventure into differentiation, and it was difficult because of the amount of time it took to plan it. But once it was planned and I was actually teaching, I did a 5 to 10 minute anchor lesson every day that everybody needed. And then I turned them loose to do their own personal learning. And sometimes it was small groups, sometimes it was individual. But no matter what it was, I was able to go and just facilitate their learning and ask important questions to drive their learning. It became a very different form of teaching and a much more enjoyable classroom. I went from having to deal with discipline to having to deal with education and curriculum in a much different way. And so that really set me up to want to find a way to make differentiation work. So now I use this method that I've mentioned before, it's the solution-centered mindset, and it was specifically to prove that differentiation works. And what I found is in the process of trying to figure out how it works, that was actually the system I used to make differentiated units. I try to take everything that the critics of differentiation were talking about and try to find solutions, a pathway to the solution of differentiation by addressing each one of the limitations that the people gave. So, for instance, they said the planning is too much. So I addressed that. The logistics in the classroom are too difficult when you have a wide range of kids. I addressed that. And what I come to find out is that if I take that same mentality and if I give the kids a final solution that we all know, then the standards in and of themselves will be the limiting factors. So if everybody has to do the standards to get to the solution, then that's a typical project, a typical problem to deal with. And everybody needs to know that. If I want to differentiate it, I can simply add another limitation for those kids that are gifted in one area or another and have them create a different pathway to that same solution with just one added feature. And if I do that, it makes them think differently about the project. It gives them additional complexities to deal with on their issues. The nice thing is I can use one rubric to grade all the projects because they are the same project. And I do have everyone working on the same basic premise. And as we all know, a lot of times when you pass out things that are looked at as the lower kids getting this, they know that. And so a lot of times that will just set them off that, why am I doing this? Am I the dumb one? And I've actually had kids say that, and I've seen that in class. So if they're all working on the same basic idea, then without a doubt, you're going to have a much better reaction in the class overall that we're all doing the same basic things with some added features. The living history program that I ran when I was in Blissfield did that in one aspect where when they got to settle their own country and they had to pick their jobs, the jobs were basically differentiated on different levels. We had news writers, newspaper writers, reporters. We had people that ran the Secretary of War. We had people that, built the railroads. So we had a very differentiated unit, but they're all working towards that common goal of settling America. So the solution-centered mindset really is something that can be done for all levels. Realize that it's not always as easy to do with elementary just because the cognitive thinking skills may not be as deep. So you may not get as many different ideas or that deeper, more complex thinking. But it's something that definitely can be done across the board with integration, and the kids are going to really enjoy the class a lot more. So I'm right there at that 10-minute mark. And if you need more information about how you can differentiate or things that I could help you with, please feel free to contact me at norm@normpotter.com. You can go to my website, structuredcreativityconsulting.com, to get more information. But really, I do think that differentiation has a place in the world, and it should be in your classroom as much as possible. Don't forget to read and write and do math, because those are always going to be critical aspects of life beyond high school. So don't forget one to do the other. Incorporate as much as you can in those classrooms, and really do start trying to find that differentiation that works for you. So as I sign off here, as we always know, be kind, be professional, and find solutions. Thank you and have a good night. I'll see you next week. Made as one, bodies and souls, flesh and bone mixed with numbers and DNA codes. So let's come together in the darkest night. May the strong hold the weaker, hold the weak up to the light. Yeah, I am not a sin.